Drivers, start your engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him, but he talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver, pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger, no sweating working for the man, alright.
Good evening, race fans. Welcome to the Draft in the Circuits radio show on the Hoobazoo Network. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we talk about a big week in racing, a lot of on-track news for Formula One and some definitely a lot of off-track news in other places. Joining me in the studio, Richard Youden, Louise Torres. Fellas, how we doing?
Very good. Yourself?
Wonderful.
It's been going. Glad all of us are here around, especially the way the week has unfolded.
Yes, the week has unfolded. Yes, I had a lot of people that listen to the show reach out to me, ask me if I'm okay, because I do live here in Kentucky, where part of our state was just absolutely battered by tornadoes. But I want to thank all those people to reach out to me and see that I was okay. But most of all the damaging weather was thankfully west of me. But there were other folks who were not quite as fortunate, including folks that I know and family members who are really having a tough time. So, but anyway, that's totally off topic. Now on topic, here we are again having to eulogize another racing great. And it really felt like a gut punch the other morning when I opened up my phone and started scrolling through my news feed and see that Al Unser Sr. had lost his battle with cancer that he'd been fighting for the last 17 years. And it's, especially hurts even worse because, we lost his brother, Bobby, just back in May, as well as Bobby Unser's son, Bobby Jr. had died in between there. But my gosh, Al Unser is, as somebody referred to him, one of my friends, when we were talking about this, as he was like a Michael Jordan style, a Michael Jordan level athlete, and as far as motor racing concerned. And I guess that holds water. His name is, a lot of times you hear the names Petty, Andretti, Foyt mentioned in the Who's the Best American Driver Ever. And a lot of times Unsers will creep into that conversation. And I don't think Al Unser's name creeps in there enough because the guy really was talented. He was definitely not as outspoken or loud as some of his other contemporaries are or were, but he got the job done. He certainly did. And, my own experiences with watching Al Unser Sr. race beginning about 1979, the first kart race I went to, I was able to obtain his autograph. He was driving for Jim Hall, driving the Chaparral, which was a beautiful car based off of the Lotus 79, if you recall, the yellow submarine, they like to call that one. And then, at the end of that year there, a very questionable decision by Al Unser to walk away from that, because that went on to be the dominant car of the following year. And there's a couple of conflicting stories as to why he left. One of the most popular ones is that he didn't like the fact that Jim Hall took a lot of credit for the design when in fact it was John Barnard who did the bulk of the designing. But either way, that's neither here nor there. Al walked away to an opportunity with Longhorn Racing, whereas the Chaparral was based on the Lotus 79. The Longhorn was pretty much a copy of the Williams FW07. And when I say it was a copy, it was made with a lot of parts from the Williams factory with a set of blueprints provided by Williams. So, for all intents and purposes, it was a Williams FW07 converted to IndyCar suspension and size tires, although it didn't work because the FW07 was designed to operate efficiently with sliding skirts, which were not legal in IndyCar at the time. But, Al struggled with that team for 3 years. And again, the other prevailing theory as to why he left the Hall team and the Chaparral program was that Longhorn had offered him a paycheck larger than anything he'd seen in his previous career. And here's a guy who was already a two-time champion and two-time Indy 500 winner. So he'd had some pretty good paydays, but yeah, so that's out there too. But after, struggling with the Longhorn program for 3 years, he ends up with Team Penske, right? And this part of Al's career, I just love it because he's like the thing that wouldn't leave, or the guy they couldn't get rid of, because if you look at it, right, they hired him in '83, he wins a championship, right? They retain him in '84. He has not as good of a season. I think he winds up ninth in the championship, and they let him go at the end of the year. They hired Danny Sullivan to replace him, and that's all done and said, and Al knows that he's departing at the end of the year. However, towards the end of '84, Rick Mears has the accident in Sanair, where he has devastating injuries to his feet and has to sit out the bulk of 1985. So Al, is retained to be the fill-in for Rick Mears. So he responds by winning the championship. Here's a guy they're ready to go ahead and pull off the pasture, and he wins him another championship. So they retain him in '86 on just the oval only schedule, and they let him go at the end of '86. So '87, he's pretty much without a ride. At Indianapolis, Team Penske, they have an accident with Danny Ungaius. Danny's not cleared to race. So again, Al Unser gets the call. Hey, can you come in, fill in for Danny? Sure. He comes in to fill in for Danny, wins the Indy 500. I'm like, why do you keep trying to get rid of this guy? You know what I mean? So, but that's just how resilient he was. And then he went on to race for a number of other years. I think he was the first guy to get a Buick engine to last 500 miles in Indy.
Yep.
And finished.
I think it's the only one. Yeah.
I think it may be, because the Buick engine was fast, and they would often sit on the front row, but they were never there at the end of the race. But he was he's the type of guy that could save the car, and he knew what the car was doing. He was very skilled, was talking with his engineers, and he really, he was a consummate professional race car driver. So
yeah, and on top of that,
I missed the guy. So Louise, you wanted to share some thoughts on Mr. Mount Rushmore, Al Unser?
Yeah, and on top of that, he got the ride after what happened to PK in '92. So initially, that was not even gonna happen. Who knows? So it kind of shows you that when given the opportunity, especially if it's a good top ride, even if it was the Buick, but it was quick, he delivered big time. And that's the one underrated element of Al Unser, because I feel like, as you said, he doesn't get fully appreciated enough by a lot of people for what he has accomplished. I mean, look no further than 1978. When he won at first, before I jumped to 78, 1970, he eviscerated the whole entire field. He pretty much, not only he holds the record for most laps led from a career perspective at Indianapolis at, what was it, 644, correct, Frank?
It's a lot. But yeah, it's the most. Yeah, he's led the most laps. Yeah,
I believe he's right up there as well for most laps led in a single 500 race that won it. Because I know, was it Graham Hill who led all but De Palma led almost the whole entire race, but had some problems and lost that one that led more than Allen.
Yeah, there's a guy that early on it led 198 laps and lost it right at the end. Yeah, but I believe Al Unser is the most laps led of a winning driver, in a race. Yeah, that was in 78, where nobody could touch him.
Yeah, he just dominated in 70, and then look at his Hoosier 100 accomplishments. He won it 4 in a row, and then the Triple Crown, the Holy Grail for the longest time, the Holy Grail of IndyCar racing on an oval, to win the 3 500-mile oval races, Pocono, Ontario, and Indy. Nobody has done it in a single year, and I think that should be appreciated much more as well, to show you how.
Yeah, plus several wins at the Pikes Peak Hill Climb as well as sports car wins and IROC wins. This guy was, again, like I said, he doesn't creep into that best ever conversation as much as he should, and I think a lot of it has to do with his quieter demeanor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure, because you have Al, young and brash, and then you have Bobby, the you could consider outspoken, but also right on the money how he felt about a lot of things. Which is all when you have those kind of personalities, it's always neat to see somebody that's kind of like in the middle that just gets the job done behind the wheel, and that's kind of what Al was. And the thing about it is, I talked about it about Robin and Bob when they passed on early this year. The same thing goes with Al because he was also there for the 500 weekend. He got to drive one of Bobby's cars on race day. So they do the pre-race parades and all that stuff. Just to think of it that 3 people that were there are no longer with us. That's why, and I'll probably eventually get to that piece about looking back to this year's 500. I have to rewatch it, the broadcast, because I've yet to do so. Because it's just everything that's going on in life I haven't been able to, just to take the time to look at it. But I feel like this year's 500 was truly the end of an era, in a way, and also just the fact that they were able to get all the 4-time winners to get that one group photo in July. I think it's just they say evergreen moment. I think that's an evergreen moment that nobody will ever forget because it's amazing that all 4 of them had a moment together and share that bond for a few months. Because it's just kind of like a sad thing that we lost one of our 4-time winners while we gained a new 4-time winner, and then we kind of lost the world last one as far as livelihood. Of course, forever he's a 4-time winner, but you catch my drift.
Yeah, I'm so glad they had to fly Al back out there in July for those photos because they could have taken those photos on Monday. I mean, because they did a bunch of photos before the thing with the 3 4-time winners because there were only 3 at the time. But Al had left Indianapolis Sunday after the race. He wasn't feeling well was the word, so he didn't hang out. So they weren't able to capture those photos when they did all the official photo shoots. But I'm so glad that they set that up and flew him back out there to go ahead and capture those photos in July because that was, realistically the last opportunity to do that. So, all right, yeah, Richard, any thoughts on Al Unser?
No, I think you guys have, have covered his legacy pretty well there. I mean, certainly a name and a personality that will go down as a somebody that defined the sport. And unfortunately, we've lost a lot of people in that sort of same mold and in many different forms of motorsport this year. But unfortunately, these things, time sort of catches up on all of us, and these things do appear to become more and more, more and more frequent, which is a great shame. And we do need to appreciate these people and their abilities when we have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, this whole generation of these guys that really define the sports are all getting to that age where they're and
they were the first generation of the respective sports as well. They sort of were the people that really took them from not part-time sports, but certainly from not the sport that they are now. They progressed it a long way into that mold.
Certainly, yeah. So now, speaking of which, here's a good segue. So speaking of these guys that are getting older, and it being kind of a changing of the guard kind of season as Formula One wrapped up, I'm here wrapping my head around the fact that the 3 major series that we cover, being Formula One, IndyCar, and NASCAR, all crowned champions who are under 30 this year, with of course Max Verstappen taking the Formula One crown there in Abu Dhabi, and we'll get into that because there's a lot to unpack there. And it's social media is still exploding with reactions of it, and there are people who feel very strongly one way or the other about the result. Some feel Lewis was robbed, some feel everything was fair. A lot of people are calling for Mike Masi's head, race director. So, Richard, I'll just let you kind of take it away there. We started with Max Verstappen on pole.
Yeah, well, I think the story of the weekend actually goes back a little bit before then. It goes back to the Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening in Abu Dhabi when we had the qualifying session. And the strategy for the race, as those of you who follow Formula One closely, will be that the tyres that you use to set your fastest lap time in Q2 are the tyres that you use to start the race on. And both the Mercedes and the Red Bull are typically fast enough to get through the second qualifying stage with the medium tire. They're not as fast as the soft tire, but they are the better tire to start the race on. So if you have the raw speed in the car to be quicker than your competitors on the medium tire than they are on the soft, then that's the strategy you want to play. And both Mercedes and McLaren and Red Bull, were doing that perfectly well. And then I think it was on Max's in lap, on his slow lap, when he locked the I think it was front right, going into turn one. And as soon as you lock a tire, flat spots it creates vibration. You really do not want to be doing that. So Max had to go back out after that on a set of soft tires, set a fastest lap, which meant that he then started the race on the soft tire, whereas Lewis was starting on the medium tire. So, Max took a great pole position in Q3 ahead of Hamilton. Red Bull played the strategy and the toe fantastically well. And even if they hadn't, I still think Max would have been on pole. The gap there was pretty big. And I think that Max would have still got that pole position there, even if Checo hadn't given him that toe. But Checo played the game perfectly there. So going into the race itself, you had Max on pole on the soft tire, Lewis second on the medium tire, and you think that immediately would put Max at a huge advantage, being 8 meters ahead of Lewis going into the first, on the line, and with the soft tire, which in theory should give you a better start. But Max had a very, very poor reaction time. He was, and to us mere mortals, 0.1 of a second is nothing, but to those guys, that's night and day. And excuse me, as you saw, Lewis got into turn one ahead of Max, which was, I don't think anybody really expected that. And they battled away through the first section of the lap there, through the revised turn 5, which is a hairpin now rather than the slow chicane, and into a hairpin onto the first of the 2 back straights, if you like, which are the prime overtaking spots on the circuit. And going down into turn, I think it's 6 and 7 now, at the end of the back stretch, Max did fantastically to get alongside Hamilton and get up the inside. And Max genuinely outbroke Hamilton, to my mind. Yeah, he went in deep, and he almost ran out of track, but he did manage to keep the car on the track, and he did go very, very deep into the corner. And Lewis ran wide because Max was in his way. But to avoid, Hamilton having to slow down and yield the position to Lewis, to Max, he actually went through the AstroTurf runoff and regained well ahead of Verstappen, almost 2 seconds. Now, there was obviously there was this whole back and forth between the team principals and the race directors of each team to the head of trackside operations normally, at Mercedes and Red Bull respectively, through to the FIA stewards. Now, the call was that Hamilton obviously had an advantage from that, and he, according to the FIA or the race stewards, gave back that advantage and slowed down enough to get Max back into the similar position. But personally, I don't think that was the case. I don't think it was the same situation as we saw in Brazil a few weeks ago, where Max was deemed to have pushed Lewis off the road. I don't think Max pushed Lewis off the road. I think Max made the corner. He made the apex. He didn't run all 4 tires off the track. Lewis could have made that corner if he'd slowed down and yielded the position to Max, but he didn't. He took to the escape road, or shortcut the chicane, and came out well ahead. So I think that was the first issue that the stewards had throughout the race.
That one was a bit confusing to me, that they decided to take no action on it, because
if they wanted to,
when they said he gave back the advantage, it certainly didn't look like that to me, because he was 2 seconds ahead.
If you're talking,
like it gained ground from going through that cutoff.
He gained a huge amount, because if you're talking about an advantage, Max, before either of them left the track, Max was ahead of Lewis, so that was the advantage to my mind. So I was very, very surprised at that call, I must admit. But that is what it is. Ed, we settled down into a routine and a rhythm, and Lewis was there on his medium tires ahead of Max on the soft, which was, I mean, you couldn't have picked a better starting scenario for the Mercedes team there. You know, they got Lewis ahead. You know, he was able to control the pace of the race, control his medium tires, and Max, you know, on the soft tires was really struggling. And after a few laps, the soft tires did, as was expected, started to degrade and give way. And, you know, Max was dropping back at a fair old rate, you know, almost half a second a lap. And I think he got down to about 5 or 6 seconds behind Hamilton. So it gave Mercedes the opportunity just to purely react to what Verstappen did. So Verstappen pitted, went onto the hard tire, which was hopefully going to get him through to the end of the race. And Mercedes reacted. Now, where Perez then came into play, because that then put Hamilton behind Checo. And for a lap and a half, 2 laps there, Checo drove a masterfully slow lap that held Hamilton up by 4 or 5 seconds. I mean, it was it sounds silly. It was a work of art in how to slow somebody down. And Hamilton actually got past Checo at one point, and then Checo got back past him again. You know, it was fantastic to watch. It was, I know it sounds really, really silly, but it was world-class driving. And then eventually, obviously, Hamilton got back and held the position, and then Checo let Max through. But, you know, Max was on the radio saying, you know, Checo, that is, you know, fantastic. That was, you know, worth its weight in gold. And yeah, great move, and really brought Max back into play. But it never really sort of played out, and there was never really an opportunity to, you know, for Max to catch Hamilton at any sort of real pace. And then, of course, we saw one of the saddest things of the weekend, I think. But one of the things we didn't really want to see was. It looked like Kimi had a brake-by-wire issue and retired from his final Formula One race after a phenomenal career, you know, 20-year career. And, you know, it's a shame to see him go, but that's just, you know, his time was up, really, and he just wants to go off and do something else. And Alfa want to bring in some new blood. We then saw George Russell retire from the race. Again, his last race with Williams. Before he moves over to Mercedes was it's a shame to see him finishing that way. And then things started to unfold a little bit. You had Giovinazzi had another issue of some sort, and he had to stop on track. He couldn't get back to the pits, and that resulted in a virtual safety car. So the cars maintain a reduced speed limit. I think it's 40% of the maximum of the top speed. So it sort of freezes the running order, and in theory should freeze the gap between cars. But what it does mean is if you make a pit stop, then relatively you're losing a lot less time during a virtual safety car pit stop than you are a real pit stop, or a live pit stop, should we say. So, you know, Verstappen came in, got a new set of hard tires, and ended up being about 20 seconds behind Hamilton with about 20 laps to go. Maybe it was a little bit less than that, maybe 18 seconds with 20 laps to go. And you know, Verstappen started, once the race resumed, Verstappen started to make inroads, but nothing huge. And, you know, Hamilton was in control. You know, they were engraving his name in the trophy there for 8-time world champion. And, you know, they even had Christian Horner live on the pit wall there come through. And, you know, he was pretty dejected, you know, about 10 laps to go. He says, you know what, all right, Lewis has just been too quick today, and you know, we need a miracle here for anything to happen. And goodness me, wouldn't you know it, they got it. Latifi span and hit the wall pretty hard, causing a lot of debris, and you know, full safety car came out.
Now of course, Mick Schumacher was involved in that Latifi wreck as well.
Yeah, but that all Mick did was ran Latifi wide, and then 5 or 6 corners later, you know, Latifi had dirt on his tires and span. I don't think that it wasn't like it was a coming together and Latifi crashed out. I think the close contact between Mick and Latifi was at turn 9, and Latifi crashed out on turn 15. So there was quite a bit of real estate between the two incidents, I think. And I think that
certainly,
was
but that has
a little bit of.
But that hasn't stopped
keyboard warriors.
That hasn't
Oh, please.
stopped your conspiracy theorists from saying that Mick was out to make sure he
Oh, please.
protect his dad's 7-time record. Yeah. So
What a load of garbage. Yes.
Anyway,
yeah,
let's get back to real facts.
Yeah. Real facts, yes. So the TV crashed out, full safety car with 5 laps to go, I think it was. Now, a safety car period for a wreck like that is typically about 5 or 6 laps. It's pretty close. But that gave Max the opportunity to pit and put on soft tires. So you went into the red, there was Hamilton on probably almost 30 lap old hard tires, and Verstappen threw on a brand new set of soft tires, which would probably be 3 or 4 seconds a lap faster under normal circumstances. It's difficult to put a real number on. But Verstappen did have one big problem. He had 4 or 5 lapped cars between himself and Hamilton. Now, this is where I think the problem started to arise. It's a very grey area in the rule. Unlike NASCAR, where I think it's pretty clear-cut, and IndyCar probably is pretty clear-cut. In Formula One, at the race director's discretion, in this case Michael Masi, he can allow for lapped cars to unlap themselves and rejoin the tail end of the pack. And that's done for numerous reasons, for safety reasons mainly. And I think typically that came in from when we had some wet races and they didn't want some of the guys back in the pack who were maybe up in the high end of the points to be hampered by spray from lapped cars. Now, it was getting very close to the end of the race, 2 laps to go, when Masi made the announcement that these 5 cars between Hamilton and Verstappen could be allowed back through, which would then have a 1-lap shootout with Hamilton on the old hard tires, and Verstappen on the new softs. Where the issue
Or in
arose,
other words, with Hamilton as a sitting duck.
basically.
Basically.
Yeah. Now, where the issue arose is that there was other cars further back in the pack that were also lapped that were behind Verstappen, but they weren't allowed to pass Verstappen or whoever, they weren't allowed to do the same sequence. And if they had, the race probably wouldn't have had time to restart. So Michael Masi made the decision to only allow these first 5 to pass, to put Hamilton and Verstappen next to each other in the pack and leave everybody else where they were. Now, that a lot of people, and Hamilton even said on the radio that has been manufactured, or I can't remember the exact word Hamilton used. Manipulated, yes, thank you. So, yeah, and to a certain extent, it was. But for a start, I think something that will come out of this, and a lot of people said, the rules need clarifying. There needs to be hard and fast rules. This is what happens under these situations. There's no interpretation. I think you'll also start to see, I think you could see a change in safety car rules where, and I've always been a proponent of this, if you have a 50-lap race and you have a safety car for 8 laps, that's only a 42-lap race. I think if there's a safety car situation, you actually bring them back into the pits to stop the race, clear up the mess, and then restart. You can have a safety car restart. You don't have to have your standing restart, but you can certainly have a safety car restart. But I think suspending the race to allow the debris clear up and everything, and allow a full quota of racing laps, is an appropriate move to make.
Yeah, and
So,
that's not without precedent. I mean, that's the IndyCar series has done that before. Just a quick red flag near the end to number 1 have a green finish without clicking off all the laps.
Yeah, the difference here is that, of course, with Formula One, it's like as soon as the red flag's lifted, they get going in a lap. But IndyCar, it'll probably take about a lap or 2, depending how things pan out. Like as you saw at Belle Isle with Will Power, there's the possibility of stalling a car, the car being fried. It's possible. Whereas Formula One, there's not. You don't see that often because of how cars roll off, different from other disciplines.
Yeah, potentially, but I think that if you put that rule in place, then people adapt to it. In Formula One, the resources are such that you can work around these potential issues. But I think it'll, and I think one of the issues we've seen, and I think it's fascinating, the whole team to FIA radio that we're now hearing, which has only been around for 18 months or so, I think, in the sport. And it really shows the dynamic between the teams and Michael Masi. Now, One thing that I thought was completely out of order was when the virtual safety car came out for Giovinazzi's retirement. Toto Wolff was straight on the radio to Michael Masi, pressurizing him not to throw a full safety car. That's not acceptable. You should not have team principals pressurizing race director to make race calls. They can ask for clarification of rules. They can ask why certain incidences were handled in the way they were, especially when there's gray areas involved. But I think that sort of communication is totally unacceptable, to turn around and say, don't do this. Well, no, that's sorry, Toto. It's not your call. And that I thought was really bad. And I think that makes, to my mind, some of the protestations that are coming from Mercedes a little bit two-faced. Well, 10 laps before all this went down, you were doing the same thing to, you were putting pressure on the race director to make a certain decision. And now he's made another decision that you don't like. Well, now you've got a problem with that. Where does that stop? Where does the buck stop with those decision calls and that sort of behavior?
Yeah, exactly. Well, as I watched this thing a couple of times, I really feel like that, the better solution as to what they did, the track was clear realistically with 3 laps to go or 2 laps to go.
Mm-hmm.
I think they should have just went ahead and went green with 2 laps to go, leave the lap cars in place. The result may have been the same, with Max, with the fast car and the soft tires. And I can't imagine any of the back markers wanting to hold them up and be the guy that, he probably would have still had an opportunity to catch up to Lewis and probably still take the win, but he would have earned it rather than the way where we move all the obstacles away and give them 1 lap. It really stinks of, let's hand this thing to Verstappen. You know what I mean?
Of course there is. Of course there is that sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but if they'd have went the lap early and left the lap cars there, we wouldn't have all this people being upset. That it'd be, hey man, heck of a drive by Max in those last couple laps to get around those cars and take the win. But that's
here's
just me.
here's the flip side of the argument. Unlike NASCAR and to a certain extent IndyCar, lap cars should not play a part in the race in Formula 1. Lap cars should move out the way when you are within 2 seconds of, or when you're less than 2 seconds ahead of a car, that's about to lap you. You should have blue flags and move out the way. Now we know that doesn't always happen. We know that some lap cars, especially when they were battling with each other, aren't always as quick as they should be to get out of the way. So that's why they have this rule in place to allow them to overtake and to get back round to the tail end, to remove the opportunity for this exact issue to occur, especially when these guys were battling with each other for position. So I understand. I think they made the right call in allowing them to pass. I think they should have done it a couple of laps earlier and let all of the cars pass. Then there wouldn't be any grey area here. Then Michael Masi could have turned around and said, look, I had this option available between the rule book. I took that option. End of story. Where Mercedes have beef is on a little bit of a technicality in a way. So, well, you only allowed 5 cars through. If you'd allowed all of the cars through when you did, they may have not got all the way back round and we may not have been able to restart the race because they only let those lapped cars through half a lap before the race restarted. So if you'd allowed all of them to go through, you probably wouldn't have got the race restarted. So that's where the issue occurred. If that decision had been made a couple of laps earlier, or there wasn't a decision to make. If the rules state at the start of the safety car's in lap, because everybody pretty much knows when the safety car is coming in, the lapped cars can start to overtake on the at the start of that lap, then we wouldn't have had this situation. I personally don't think that it was very unfortunate. But what would have happened if Verstappen hadn't pitted and was on hard at all the tires? There may not have been the issue.
What would have happened if Lewis also pitted?
If Lewis had pitted, if Max wouldn't have done,
and if they both
let
pitted.
all those cars,
If both pitted,
they would never have done that. They would never have both pitted. because you would have given up track position. So if Lewis had pitted, Max would have stayed out on the older tyres. Lewis would have come in and have the fresh rubber. And then if they'd allowed all the lap cars through, Lewis would have won the championship.
Yeah, because Hamilton was just fast no matter what.
So,
we saw that all race.
It was a typical, Atlanta, NASCAR race or whatever, or Phoenix, a few years ago when Newman won. What happens if you pit? If you're under those set of circumstances, if you have the first car, you've got to make the call, and you typically will never win. Because whatever call you make, it's going to, But I think in this case, if they had pitted, it would have given Max the track position. But Mercedes didn't know whether they would have allowed those lap cars back through it. And I'm pretty certain that's what forced their hand. But again, that's where the rule book is open to interpretation. And Michael Masi is perfectly justified in implementing that interpretation into how he sees fit to allow the race to come to a natural conclusion. But he can't be seen to, if he'd left those lapped cars there, then Red Bull would be screaming to say, well, you left those lapped cars there. You had the opportunity to allow a race to the end, and you didn't allow that race to occur. So I think the criticism is unfair on Masi to a certain extent. I know why he's being criticised, but I think the bigger issue needs to go on the FIA's shoulder, because they didn't give him at the end of the day, all Michael Masi is doing is he's like a referee at a soccer game or a football game or an umpire at a baseball game or whatever. He is implementing the rules as he sees fit. And he did that. He did that. Yeah, he did that to the and it's right in the sporting regulation that it is as the race director sees fit. Now, as some of the things that other folks are saying, oh, they should have extended the race distance. I mean, well, no, that's not in the rules. That would really be Massey making up rules on the fly if we're going to do something you like can't do that.
Now,
if
you
read
precedent, we've seen instances where the laps was cut prematurely over a botch checker flag moment, but not extended.
No, I mean, if he'd red flagged the race, I think that would have been worse, because that then again could have been considered manipulation. Because yes, those lap cars would have then had to have gone to the back of the grid. But then they'd be saying, oh, well, they're red flagging the race, when it wasn't a red flag situation. There's no damage to the track. There was no damage there's no injuries to Latifi, thankfully. So I think he was put in a very, very difficult position by the rules. The rules put Masi in a difficult position. And he did the best he could do. And I understand a certain amount of the criticism, but, the rules will need clarifying.
Then the question is, what about Baku? When the race was stopped that very, very late in the race, what would be your side?
Because of the amount of debris on the track, it would have.
Because it was on a racing line.
It was on the racing line, and there's a lot of debris on there, and they did drive through the pit lane, but it's the same argument. If Hamilton hadn't screwed up that restart, he would have won the championship based on a decision by the race director to stop the race. So they weren't complaining then, were they? I mean, they were. Well, they weren't complaining. They were, Hamilton screwed up and cost himself the win, and Checo ended up winning. But so yeah, it's right. You're right. This is what I think will happen. We will see this going forward. I think you will see the rule book in sporting regulations, not the rule book, because there are two different things. The sporting regulations changed and updated to clarify these situations and say, in this set of circumstances, this is what will happen. Now, we're not trying to turn this into NASCAR, where you throw a Danica caution. Because that's not how Formula One race. Formula One races should be decided by the fastest car. Now, you could argue that Hamilton was the fastest car that weekend. Now, I mean, if we, not wanting to diverge, but if we take a step back here and look at, the period, look at the season as a whole, I would probably say that it was close, but Verstappen just about edged it in terms of, and I don't want to use the word deserving the championship, because I hate that phrase, because at the end of the day, Max got the most points, so he deserved the championship. But looking on performance, and if you take points out of it, you look on driving and results and speed, I would put Verstappen just ahead by in horse racing terms, it would be a photo finish, but I would have put Verstappen just ahead. However, you look at Hamilton's performances post Brazil, or post Mexico, going into Brazil, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Abu Dhabi. I don't think we will ever see 4 races of such dominance by an individual driver. I know he had this super engine that appeared in Brazil and all this sort of stuff, and you can give Mercedes a huge amount of credit for that. But the guy for those 4 races was phenomenal, as Red Bull had been, the 5 or 6 races ahead of that, where Verstappen sort of stretched out that lead. But for those last 4 races, wow. I mean, we can look back on those, and it was incredible. The performance that Hamilton put in, especially in Brazil, it was unbelievable. Qatar was dominant. Saudi was a bit of a heesh. Well, yeah, Saudi was Saudi. But then again, in Abu Dhabi, Hamilton dominated that race. You can't, there's no 2 ways about it. Now, if Verstappen had been able to keep that lead at the start of the race, who knows what would have happened. But I think Hamilton would have got past because he was that much quicker.
No, he was that much quicker all day. Yeah, I mean, compared to Lewis on the day, Max was nowhere to be found. No. You know what I mean? So, but at the end of the day, like I say, had Lewis driven at that level, he's driven the last 5-6 weeks, all season long, this championship wouldn't even be close.
Well, I think if Mercedes had given him the engine,
true,
because that was that engine. You look at it, and that engine that he's had for 3 of those last 4. I don't think he had that engine in Qatar. I think he had it in Brazil, Saudi, and Abu Dhabi. Yeah, that engine. Wow. That's I mean, whew. Now, I'm sure that isn't the engine mode and the specification that Mercedes would want to run over 6 or 7 races, whatever the typical engine life is. That's not how they want to push an engine for that. They knew they had this race. This engine's got to do 3 races. And, we know that Brazil is probably the one where we can really attack. And we know that it's going to be good at Saudi, useful at Saudi, where they had that long full throttle stretch. And, we may go into Abu Dhabi needing to win, and we need the power. But again, this wouldn't have been planned the week before Brazil, going, hey boys, we need to deliver a really good engine here. This would have been planned months ago in a natural development to give them that opportunity. And they used it and they utilized it. So it has been such a tight championship and such a close run event that, it's a shame it had to end, really. And it's a shame it ended in the way it did. It really is. I understand where people are frustrated at that. But I do think that by the skin of his teeth, Max deserved the championship through his just general performance. And I think that actually in a sort of unfortunate way, the incidents and the events of certainly Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi will force the FIA and the stewards and the race directors to look at how they implement these rules, how they design circuits, and move forward from there. Now, looking at some of the circuits as well, you look at Abu Dhabi and Dubai especially, if you had gravel traps on the exit of those chicanes, a lot of the driving and a lot of the, a lot of contention that we've had would never have existed. They'd be stuck in the gravel trap. Hamilton would never have been able to cut the corner like he did. Some of the events we saw at Saudi would never have happened. So I think that we need to look at that. I know there's the concept that these big flat AstroTurf runoff areas are safer and the like, but sometimes I don't know if it is. I don't know if it benefits the racing. I think that there needs to be a bigger penalty when cars leave the track, and I think you do that naturally rather than from a steward's perspective. And we talked about this last week. Oh
yeah, we've talked about it a lot over the last year or so. All right, so I guess the real question now going into next year, everyone's going to have the new rules, new cars. And so really need to see how Lewis bounces back from this defeat.
Yeah, I mean,
he handled it quite well right there in person. I don't know how
I think he handled it better than everybody else, didn't he? I think
Certainly,
for the most, compared to Toto, for the most
part. I thought
part.
Toto. I mean, I know it's emotion, but I thought Toto was pretty damn embarrassing with some of the antics that he came up with.
And of course, there's some talk of Mercedes hiring some lawyers to try to, but I personally I don't see that going anywhere. Even I don't
want this to turn into a soup battle, because that's the thing that irritated me more, is because this turned into a battle
that'll just serve to tarnish the sport even more.
Yeah,
I don't see any of that happening, but just strictly next year. So we've got Max going in defending. Lewis with admittedly a little bit of a chip on his shoulder here, but the big unknown is the cars. You know what I mean? We would expect Mercedes to, be very, very good out of the box. We would expect Red Bull to probably be pretty good out of the box, but you got some wild cards out there. I mean, does Ferrari get this one right the first time? Right? Does McLaren has been improving a lot? Does McLaren come fresh out of the box with a 2022 spec car that is just phenomenal? I'll
tell you who I think is going to be the big, and I'm not going to guarantee it, but I've got a sneaking suspicion that Alpine will be good next year. I think of all
certainly, that's the other wild card
that have been sort of mid pack this year, and sort of I think that Alpine could pull a rabbit out of the hat, though. I mean, especially with Alonso there, I still rate him. I know he's the wrong side of 40 in a sporting context, but I still rate him as a driver. I still rate him as what he can do. And Ocon is certainly no slouch and proven.
He's redeemed himself big time.
Yeah, I don't know if redeemed is the right word, but I think he's proven that. Because I don't think he's ever. I don't think there's ever a question of his pace. I just think there's a bit of a question of his attitude, and I think he's proven that he's matured, and he's now in a position where he can be I hate using this phrase, a proper Formula One driver. You've seen lots of guys come through on Acon's level that, just don't cut it, not because of pace, but because of attitude. And I'm thinking of Pascal Wehrlein, prime example. Very, very fast driver. From all the comments I've heard, a complete arsehole to work with. And some other drivers have been in the same ilk as that. But Ocon sort of matured a little bit, I think, and I think the time away that he had for a year or two there really did benefit him. And now I think he's I'm not going to say a championship caliber driver, but certainly he's impressed a lot of people this year.
Yeah, and then of course the other big wild card is Lewis with a young, hungry teammate.
Yeah.
George, so you've got George Russell in there in the Mercedes wanting to do well. I mean, I don't know, how if Mercedes will stifle him or ask him to come back and play the good number two. But I think that Lewis's biggest competition might come from within his own team.
I don't think Mercedes have ever done that in the way that Red Bull and Ferrari have. I don't think at Mercedes there is this clear 1-2 role, unless it gets to this point of the championship where they do what they need to do. And Valtteri was very good at that. He knew which way his bread was buttered, and if he had an opportunity to win a race, he would take it. But he knew that if when it got to the sharp end of the season, and the chances are he wouldn't be involved in the battles, which I don't think he ever really was, he would yield to Hamilton and act that supporting role, and he did a fantastic job at it. I don't think you're going to see that with George. I really, truly don't. I think that let's put it this is my take on it anyway. Valtteri was brought into Mercedes to be a stopgap or to be a filler whilst they worked out what was going to happen after Rosberg left suddenly. They didn't have a plan. They didn't have a plan of, what was if Rosberg wins the championship and then quits the following day? This was what do we do now? I'm Toto Wolff, I'm the team principal of Mercedes, and I'm also Valtteri Bottas' manager. We supply Williams with some engines. This is all going to work out really, really well. And I think Valtteri probably ended up there longer than he expected to be. You know, he did a job. He did what was asked from him. That's not the case with George. George has been promoted. They could have kept Valtteri for another year or two, and it wouldn't have hurt anybody. You know, Valtteri would have done the same thing he's done the last 2 or 3 years, won a couple of races, done his due diligence, collected a really nice, fat, hefty paycheck, and done what he needed to do. That's not George Russell. George Russell is, in Toto Wolff and Mercedes' eyes, he's Lewis Hamilton's heir apparent. And that's his job. And if George goes in there and plays second fiddle to Lewis, it's never going to work. George has to go in there and beat Lewis and push him. And the same thing goes for Verstappen in a way. If Verstappen hadn't won the championship and Lewis had won number 8, and, you know, Lewis is at his peak still. Now, who's to say he would be in that position in a year's time with George there? So say George comes in and competes with Lewis and stops Lewis from winning a 9th world championship, and Max goes in and wins that. Great. But there'll still be there would have been this doubt in the back of Verstappen's mind. I never beat Hamilton when he was at his peak. Now, I'm not saying that's not going to happen next year. I'm not going to say that Lewis isn't going to be back at his peak next year and beat Max. But I just think that this was the opportune moment that Max had to take. If he hadn't won the championship this year, and maybe Hamilton wasn't at his best next year, there would have always been this little niggle in the back of Max's mind. There's like, did I beat him, you know, when he was at the top of his game? You know, it's almost like golfers that won tournaments when Tiger Woods has been injured. You know, they probably always sat there thinking, well, if Tiger wasn't injured, maybe I wouldn't have won. You know, and it's a pretty horrible thing for them. But I think that's the same. You know, Max now knows that he's beaten Hamilton, arguably the best driver, or at least in the top 5 best drivers in the history of the sport. And he's beaten him in a fair one-on-one battle. And I think next year is going to be a fantastic dynamic to see what Russell does. And I you know what? I would not surprise me if Russell doesn't beat Hamilton next year. It would not surprise me.
It would not surprise me. I think Russell, like, he's young, he's very talented, he's very good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once he's comfortable within that team and the way the team operates, you know, again, like you said, heir apparent to Lewis Hamilton, because Lewis doesn't have a lot left to prove. He either owns or shares nearly every record in Formula One. So, but anyway,
the other question. Sorry,
real quick.
Quickly. Sorry, the question is from Hamilton. Where does he go now? As we spoke about this, you know, I mentioned this earlier, you know, a few weeks ago throughout the year. Where does Hamilton go now? He's 35, 36, and he's now got to go away, re-engage himself, almost like he did with Rosberg. You know, he's got to now go away. And now Rosberg pulled the ultimate ace and quit. So Hamilton never had a chance to beat Rosberg. Now he does with Max. But does he have that? I'm not going to say desire, because I'm sure the desire is there. But we're talking about such fine margins here, you know, points of a percent here that Hamilton and Verstappen have been running at this year. You know, was Lewis at 99.8% this year? Is there another 2.2% he can get out of himself? Or was he at 100%? You know, and can he maintain that? I can't. You know, goodness me, we're 2 days out of the championship, and I can't wait for next year already. It's going to be amazing to see that dynamic. It really is, and just the level that these guys can work at.
No, for sure. If anything, with Russell and Mercedes, if at worst it could be Vettel 09 at Red Bull, have a rough skid, but getting together as the season progressed. Because that's what happened with Vettel when he went to Red Bull. And some people say, had it not been for that rough skid, he probably would have won the championship in 09 over Button. But we'll never know.
Yeah, possibly. And of course,
yeah.
We do
so
have
guys,
this whole issue.
we've just got a few minutes left. We've taken up a lot of space with Formula One, but let's just bang out some of these other news stories that are happening this week before we get off the air. Number one, let's talk about NBC has announced that Paul Tracy will no longer be in the booth. You know, it's up in the air whether or not Paul Tracy was fired or whether it was mutual, but I mean, either way, Paul is moving on. He's probably going to pursue some racing things. I think he's got a couple of lines in IMSA as well as doing the Tony Stewart series again. And kind of related to that news is James Hinchcliffe announced his intent to walk away from full-time IndyCar racing and semi-retire from the sport. He said walk away from full-time competition, although you can read into that there were no rides available that didn't require funding and he wasn't able to get funding. But the hot rumor puts him in Paul Tracy's spot at NBC in the broadcast booth, which, James has done some work with NBC, some of the broadcasts, some of the Indy Lights broadcast, and some of the pre-race and qualifying shows and those sort of things. So that may be a good career move for Hinch. Hopefully he finds an Indy 500 ride. Speaking of Indy 500 rides, Dry Reinbold announced their lineup for the 2022 Indy 500, which will be Sage Karam and Santino Ferrucci. So a couple of pretty young, talented guys there in those cars. And Louise, you were telling me Colleague Racing announced their lineup. They'll have AJ Allmendinger, Noah Gragson, and Daniel Hemrick sharing their Cup car.
Yep, the number 16 car, which,
right?
Yep, Allmendinger was already announced that he was going to run a limited Cup schedule for 2022. The only one that was confirmed full-time in one of the cars was Justin Haley, and the now yet to be determined number, because the rule is if you're going to have a full-time car, to have a chart, you must have a driver run you must have a car that runs all 36 races. Of course, when the initial deal was announced, there was two cars, with one of them, Allmendinger, being part-time, with the other drivers yet to be announced. Today, we finally know it's going to be the rating Xfinity champion, Daniel Hemrick, and the polarizing Noah Gragson, where he'll run the majority of the schedule of that 16 car. Time will tell if this it'll have ramifications as far as Rookie of the Year status when he eventually should go to Cup full-time. Should he end up going full-time in the foreseeable future, but we'll see how that dynamic goes between Dinger, Gregson, and Hemrick, because they could put a decent running for that. This is one of those things we need Seth on this to remind me if this applies for Cucks. I know at Xfinity and trucks, you can have an all-star lineup in one car and can win the championship like we've seen with the 22 Penske and the 8 and the Joe Gibbs 54 over the years. I'm not sure how that applies to Cup, but I imagine it does work the same. But I need to look that up next week.
Call Seth, he'll know.
But yeah, and then also in other news, there's be more next gen testing at Charlotte. So we'll see how this time it will go around. Bubba Wallace will have Wheaties on the 23 car, and Discount Tire will also expand to Ryan Blaney and Team Penske, not just with the 2 car of Austin Cindric.
Right. And also Formula One is beginning their young driver testing and their mule car testing. We saw that in day one of testing, Nick DeVries was fastest in the Mercedes. Pato Award out of IndyCar was given a chance to drive the McLaren Formula One car, and if you follow Pato on social media and see some of his reactions, really fun to watch. He was kind of blown away with his experience driving a modern Formula One car. So that looks pretty fun. So I mean, with that being said, we are out of time. We will join you next week. Next week we'll be doing our season-ending show, where we'll make our bold predictions for next year. So you two guys think about that. We'll see if we can scare up a guest or two to join us. But until then, I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network, and I want to thank Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and YouTube. And I want to thank you folks that listen to us week in and week out. But until next week, good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website.